Imagine this: 15 years old, an orphan, alone in London, and her virginity is being auctioned off to hideous old monsters. She is Fanny Hill, and she's not just a victim, she will sleep with anyone to survive. And she's only enjoy every second of it. But ain't a story of falling, this is a story of rising. Welcome to the most scandalous novel of the 18th century, Fanny Hill, or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure. There are no dirty words here, but there are orgies, floggings, lesbian encounters, and a loss of innocence that will make you blush. And we are bringing you all of it with direct quotes from the book. Fanny will learn to turn her body into capital. She will lose the man she loves, find fortune, and then unexpectedly find him again. And the author, John Cleland, describes it all in a language that is both exalted and vulgar. He calls the vagina the lower mouth, the penis is a machine, and the monster sex scenes are battles and assaults. Today, we're breaking down this novel block by block, from innocence through depravity to redemption, with quotes, with details, uncensored. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, leave a comment, and share this video with your friends. You'll be doing them a favor and helping this community grow. You are on RobertBooks channel. It's going to get hot, so let's get ready! The novel was written by John Cleland, an English writer who worked as a consul in Smyrna and later as an employee of the British East India Company in Bombay. The first drafts appeared as early as 1740, while Cleland was actually in this Bombay. The final version was written a little later, while the author was sitting in a debtor's prison in London. Interesting beginning. The novel was published anonymously in two parts, on November 1748 and February 1749. The publishers were the Griffith brothers, operating under the pseudonym G. Fenton in November 1749, because Cleland and his publisher were arrested on charges of corrupting the king's subjects. In court, Cleland disowned the novel and the charges were dropped, but the book was withdrawn from sale. Despite this ban, the novel became widely popular. Pirated editions appeared, and it was sold on the counter all over Europe and America. Throughout the 19th century, it circulated underground in British and United States. The first USA trial in 1821 in Massachusetts held the first obscenity trial in American history, and it was against Fanny Hill. The publisher was found guilty and the book was banned. The judge wrote that the book was so obscene, loathsome, and indecent that it is an insult to the court even to mention it in documents. 20th century legalization then comes. In 1963, the British publisher RobertBooks released an uncensored paperback edition. This led to a high-profile trial a year later, and the prosecution won. But the scandal shifted public opinion. Eventually, in 1970, the book was officially permitted in Britain. In USA, a little earlier, like 4 years ago. Before. The Supreme Court ruled in the Memoirs with Massachusetts that Fanny Hill was not obscene. This was a landmark verdict that paved the way for the publication next for the Legendary Slava or Tropic of Cancer, such kind of books. Detailed breakdown. So we start with prologue. The novel opens with Fanny addressing a certain madame to whom she promises to tell her story with absolute frankness. This isn't just an introduction, it's a manifesto that sets the tone for the entire book. Fanny declares she will soften nothing and embellish nothing. Truth, stark, naked truth, is the word, and I will not so much think of bestowing a veil over, but shall paint situations as they appear to me in nature, without regard to those laws of decorum which were never made for such unreserved intimacies as ours. She compares her revelation to paintings of the nude, which the greatest men, those of the finest and most delicate taste, are not ashamed to adorn their private closets with. This statement prepares the reader for scenes described without shame and with evident pleasure. Childhood and the loss of innocence. Fanny gives her maiden name Frances Hill. She was born in a small village near Liverpool in Lancashire to a family extremely poor and, as I piously believe, extremely honest. Her father was a cripple who earned his living by making nets, while her mother kept a small day school for girls. Fanny's childhood was simple and innocent. She admits, my education till past 14 was no better than very vulgar. Reading, or rather spelling, an illegible scroll, and a little ordinarily plain work composed the whole system of it. And all my foundation in virtue was no other than a total ignorance of vice and a timid bashfulness, natural to my sex at that tender age. Her mother, absorbed in running the school and household, never taught Fanny to be cautious. In her innocence, not knowing evil, she had not at least hint or thought of guarding me against it. The quote is key. Fanny was the perfect prey for the predators of the big city, naive, ignorant of vice, yet already entering her 15th year. Then tragedy strikes. Her parents die of smallpox within days of each other. I was now entering on my 15 year, when the worst of ills befell me in the loss of tender fond parents, who were both carried off by the smallpox within a few days of each other, my father dying first, and thereby hastening the death of my mother. Fanny herself caught the same disease, but mildly and crucially for her future. She was entirely unmarked, her face bore no pockmarks. This makes her a premium thing, premium commodity for future patrons. The temptation of the big city. Left an orphan, Fanny finds herself at the mercy of strangers, and this situation becomes intolerable to me, from the change of the tenderest usage to a cold charity. Around this time, a certain Esther Davis, a young woman working in London, comes to visit the village. She becomes the temptress who ignites Fanny's desire to leave the countryside. Esther tells Fanny about London as if it were a fairy tale. She talked of the fine sights that were to be seen in London: the tombs, the lions, the king, the royal family, the fine plays and operas, and in short, all the diversions which fill within her circle, the detail of all which perfectly turned the little head of me. Fanny gazes at the stars clouded with a mixture of longing and envy. Our country church dresses did not rise above crow's shifts and staff groans, and we looked with admiration, not unmixed with envy, at Esther's clean satin grows, caps bordered with lace and inch-broad, putty-colored ribbons, and shoes with silver buckles. Fanny naively believed that all these grew in London, but more importantly, Esther fuels her hopes with tales of fairy tale success, a vulgar, successful success. Esther fuels her hub, a vulgar parody of Samuel Richardson Pamela, or richly rewarded as literary scholars confirm. Esther told how several maids out of the country had made themselves and all their kin forever, that by preserving their virtue, some had taken so with the masters that they had married them and kept them coaches and lived vastly grand and happy, and some mayhap came to be duchesses. Under the spell of these sweet tales, Fanny gathers her meager belongings and, with what she considers a fortune, 8 guineas and 17 shillings in silver, which she calls a greater treasure than ever I had yet seen together, sets off for London by stagecoach. The road, Fanny encounters predatory male attention for the first time. The coachman greedily ogles her, and some passengers scheme to take advantage of her innocence. Yet Esther, who should have been her protector, shows motherly care, but only to safeguard her merchandise. Arriving in London on a late summer evening, Fanny is overwhelmed by the noise and bustle. As we pass through the greatest streets that led to our inn, the noise of the coaches, the hurry, the crowds of foot passengers ensured the new scenery of the shops and houses at once pleased and amazed me. But the worst was waiting for her at the inn. Esther Davis, who had been kind to Fanny throughout the journey, suddenly pulls away. Instead of offering me the continuation of her assistance and good offices, which I relied upon and never stood more in need of, she, it seems, looked upon herself as fully acquitted of her engagements to me, by having safely conveyed me to the place of my destination. Job is done. Esther delivers a farewell speech, advises Fanny to find a private lodging, and then hypocritically wishes her always to have the grace to keep yourself honest and not bring disgrace upon your parents. Good advice. After which she leaves the girl alone, absolutely destitute and friendless. Meeting a new fate in this desperate state, confused and abandoned, Fanny finds herself in the heart of London, where she must seek work. It is precisely then at the plot goes that she catches the eye of Miss Brown, who, posing as the kind benefactress, offers her employment. And so the naive, flesh and blood innocent country girl, guided by stark naked truth, steps onto the path that will lead her into a escort house. Entering Miss Brown's house. After Fanny is felt alone in London, she ends up at Miss Brown's house, who presents herself as a kind benefactress. On the very first night, she is given a roommate, a girl named Phoebe. Fanny doesn't initially realize the danger, but Phoebe immediately begins to educate her. This is not crude violence, but a gradual, sensual, step-by-step corruption through touch. She kissed me, and her tongue sealed into my mouth, and her hand slipped under in the blanket and began to fondle my breast. Fanny describes her sensations as a mixture of fear and awakening desire. Phoebe acts as an experienced mentor, and her touch is warmed and surprised. Fanny, rather than frightening her. Phoebe confesses that she needs not only to touch but also to see. "No," says Phoebe, "you must not, my sweet girl, think to hide all these treasures from me. My sight must be as much feasted as my touch. I have not seen enough yet." She caresses Fanny's body, admiring its youth and beauty. "I must devour with my eyes this willing breast. What firm, smooth, white flesh is here! How exquisitely it is formed!" Fanny yields to these caresses, through later, looking back, she will condemn this as a dangerous introduction to vice. And meeting Mr. Crafts, the old hideous monster. So Mr. Brown, seeing that Fanny is a virgin and she decides to sell her innocence, she strikes a deal with a hideous old man named Mr. Crafts. The price, 50 guineas for the attempt itself, and another 100 for successfully taking her virginity. Fanny describes his appearance with horror, a grotesque, almost monstrous eagliness. "Figure to yourself a man of upwards of 60, low of stature and misshapen, with a yellow cadaverous hue, with goggling eyes, with seam starting from his head, as if he was strangled, a mouth drawn down on one side, from which protrude rather fangs than teeth, with blubber lips and a breath like that of common sewer." My gosh, what a picture. She calls him a monster. Mr. Crafts ignores her resistance and begins to molest her. He without delay throws his arms around my neck and, drawing me to him, forces me, despite my attempts to free myself, to receive his plague-written kisses. When Fanny in desperation calls him old and ugly, this is only inflames his rage and lust. He tries to take her by force, but fails. The brute, as I later understood through his eagerness and struggle, had brought himself to the end of his bond of lust, for the full execution of which his powers were insufficient, and my thighs and linen received their effusion. This episode is Fanny's first disappointment and first fear, but paradoxically, it preserves her virginity. Afterward, Fanny remains in the house. After this revolting scene, Fanny falls ill with a fever from the shock and the days of terror she endured. However, her virginity remains intact, which makes her an even more value. Oh, sorry. Makes you even more valuable commodity in Miss Brown's eyes. The Madame decides not to sell Fanny immediately, but to wait for a more noble and wealthy client to secure a greater profit. So Fanny finds herself a prisoner, though she does not yet fully understand that her fate is already sealed and she has become part of this college of vice. Escape and attempt to start a new life. After Fanny recovers from her illness and the revolting scene with Mr. Crafts, a young man appears at Miss Brown's house. Fanny described him as a true Adonis, Charles, the dear, familiar name by which I must henceforth call my Adonis. This moment becomes a turning point in her fate. She literally loses her head over his beauty and charm. As she later confesses, "I wished for him, I adored him, I could have died for him." He, in turn, is equally charmed by young Fanny and decides to buy her out from Miss Brown, persuading the girl to run away with him. Then comes escape and first night of love. Charles takes Fanny to his apartment on St. James Street in London, where he rents a room from a certain Miss Jones. He leads her to the bedroom where the main view from the window turns out to be the bed. Charles had no sooner shut the bolts of the door than, catching me in his arms, he threw me, trembling, panting, dying with sweet fears and tender desires, upon the bed. In this scene, Cleland unleashes his full erotic rhetoric. Fanny describes how he undresses her. My breasts now were bare and rising in the warmest throbbings, presented to his sight and touched the stiff, hot protuberance of pair of young breasts. But even their springiness, whiteness, beauty, their agreeable resistance to the touch could not bribe his busy hands from straying further. Charles slips his hand under her skirts and Fanny feels his touch on her most intimate places. My petticoats and shifts were scone lifted up, and their strongest center of attraction laid open to their gentle invasion. The loss of virginity. The most piquant detail in this scene is that Charles has no idea Fanny is a virgin. He assumes that since she lived in a brothel, she must be experienced. He bears his instrument of Eremus attack. He unbuttoned himself and, drawing out the instrument of amorous attack, pointed it as at ready breach. My gosh. And then comes the moment of truth. Charles tries to enter her, but meets an impassable obstacle. Then, for the first time, I felt the stiff, horn-hard flesh beating against the leather pad. But conceive his surprise when, after several vigorous pushes, which caused me exquisite pain, he found he's simply too big for her, since few men could dispute size with him. He tries again and again, but cannot penetrate. When he finally stops and asks if she's used to gentle treatment, Fanny replies, "He was the first man who had ever served me so." And Charles finally understands the truth. Fanny described this with astonishing candor. Charles, already disposed by the testimony of his senses to think my claims to virginity not quite apocryphal, smothers me with kisses, begs me in the name of love to have a little patience, and that he will be as tender for fear of hurting me as if it were himself. And she submits to him with joy, no matter how much pain is foretells. As it was enough for me to know his desire, to joyfully yield to him whatever pain it might cost me. After that first night, Charles and Fanny becomes lovers. For nearly 8 months, he visits her almost daily, and they make love again. Fanny describes her feelings. I had now taken the air of true love from the point to the feather. She even becomes pregnant by him, which only strengthened their bond. Charles plans to introduce her to his father, but then, exactly 3 months after Fanny learns of her pregnancy, Charles mysteriously vanishes. Fanny is in despair. She has no idea what has happened to her beloved. Miss Jones brings her the terrible news. Landlady, yeah. Charles' father had learned of the affair and sent his son to the South Seas to seek his fortune. This wasn't just an escape, it was an abduction orchestrated by his father. The shock of this news is so great that Fanny loses her baby. Distraught by the news that Charles would be away of at least 3 years, Fanny miscarries and falls ill. Miss Jones nurses her back to health, not out of altruism, but because she wants the rent Fanny owes. Financial difficulties, and the deal comes. So Fanny is left alone, without money, without her beloved, in debt. Miss Jones, who has shown care for the sick girl, is actually planning to hand her over to a new patron. She introduces family to a wealthy merchant, Mr. H. He pays off all her debts and takes over the upkeep of her apartment. Fanny feels both. She considers herself both and him her new master. And so ends Fanny's first romance and begins her career as a kept woman. The love that was supposed to save her leads instead to new, even more cynical dependence. Life in a different strata of London society. Miss Cole's house, an elite brothel. So, after Miss H throws Fanny out for cheating with his servant Will. We will come back later and talk some details about this. She finds herself on the street, but she has some money, like £800 she saved. And she decides not to drag out a miserable existence, but to find a decent brothel for an elite clients, elite escort. So she ends up with Miss Cole, who runs her business on a grand scale. As Fanny writes, Miss Cole's house had an atmosphere of comfort and merriment. After I had spent the morning in caresses and instructions from my new acquaintance, we went to dinner when Miss Cole, presiding at the head of her board, gave me the first idea of her management and art, inspiring these lively, sweet girls with such sensitive love and respect for her. There was no stiffness, no reserve, no faint offense, no pretty jealousies, but everything was genuinely cheerful, lively, and easy. Miss Easy, absolutely, yeah. Miss Cole announces to Fanny that there will be a ceremony of initiation into sisterhood. We know what kind of it would be, yeah. This wasn't just sex, but a theatrical performance with full immersion. Orgy. Just classic orgy as a spectacle. Fanny's initiation at Miss Cole's house was staged as a real theatrical performance. The drawing room was turned into a stage. The table was removed from the middle and made into a sideboard. In its place, they put a couch. Four couples took turns displaying their love games before the others, like actors on a stage. Fanny describes it thus: the first who rose to open the ball was a cornet of course, and Louisa. The double orgy is simultaneously a ball where Fanny debates in this society. Literary scholars note that this scene is a mingling of drawing room, dining room, ballroom, and stage simultaneously coexisted, with one real room manifesting each of these functions in turn. Each couple performed their number to the applause of the others. Each couple's performance on this scene of action was openly watched and applauded by the other members of the company and troupe. Fanny participates in the orgy with enthusiasm. Oh, really? Describing it with delight. I wasn't completely immersed in this revel of lust, and my senses excited to the extreme demanded satisfaction. She describes her partner, who seizes her and introduces the instrument. He bared this monster, this machine, and directed it into my already moist with desire womb. Oh, how I craved this invasion! One of the most scandalous episodes of Black is Fanny's encounter with Mr. Barwell, who pays to be flogged. Fanny described this as something unusual. This was a young man, not an old man, as is usually the case with those who resort to this experiment to revive the circulation of their sluggish juices and determine the flow of spirits of pleasure to these fallen, shriveled parts. Fanny is initially embarrassed, but then carries out his request. Seizing one of the roads, I stood over and, according to his direction, dealt him in one breath 10 strokes with great zeal and all the strength of my arm, so that these fleshly spheres trembled under them, while he himself seemed not to care about them in the least, or pay any more attention to them than a lobster does to a flea. She watches his reaction. Each stroke stripped the surface on these white rocks, which they deeply redeemed, and curling around the side farthest from me, cut especially into the dimple of it, leaving such livid wheels that the blood either spurted from them or stood in large drops. And from some cuts I pulled out splinters of the rods which had stuck in the skin. So freaky. Fanny continues the flogging until she notices that Beryl writhes and twists his body and realizes that this is not from pain, but from some new and strong sensation. That's an orgasm. He's going to come. But as researchers note, Beryl himself is ashamed of this habit. He is in a state of constant conflict with himself and rejection of himself for being enslaved to such a peculiar taste. Homosexuality as revulsion. This is one of the most powerful scenes in the novel, and it has enormous significance for understanding Fanny's morality. She peers through a crack in the door at two young men engaging in anal sex. Her reaction is not arousal but anger and revulsion. Fanny is so filled with anger and indignation at the sight of this criminal scene that she falls and loses consciousness. Literally, scholars write that this sodomical passage demonstrates the strong phobic attraction of the dominant culture to the socially marginal, other against which it defines itself. For Fanny as for Miss Cole, such relationships are unnatural perversion, a collapse of sex, gender, and class paradigms. What hypocrisy! They can fuck her for money, but men cannot do it with each other. A separate scene, selling virginities. One of the most also famous scenes in Miss Cole's house is when Fanny simulates virginity for young Percival, the son of wealthy merchant. Miss Cole arranges everything so that the client thinks he's in Fanny's first. Percival is a naive young youth who was educated privately in the country, had scarcely ever seen a girl, and has no idea how it's done. His father, Mr. Hayden, pays for his son to complete his education. Fanny plays for the role of an innocent girl. Percival's father, eavesdropping at the door, gives instructions, like Mr. Hayden shouting from behind the door, "Go on, my son." Percival first thinks he needs to get on top like a bull with a cow. Fanny teaches him, I think we can do it face to face. When he finally penetrates, he shouts, "It's in! It's in!" The father is delighted. Excellent! Miss Cole and other prostitutes watch this scene, joining in the laughter and rejoicing. What a circle, my! Also, another piquant scene from this block is the story of good-natured Dick, a mentally retarded flower seller. Louisa, Fanny's friend, seduces him driven by curiosity. Louisa whispered to me that she felt a strange curiosity to know whether nature had rewarded him with some special bodily gift for his lack of speech and mental faculties. Fanny gladly agrees to help. Strict modesty was never a vice of mine. Far from objecting to such a whim, I found the idea so amusing that I was no less impatient than she to clear up this question. Fanny begins to molest Dick. I began the attack, doing him little mischiefs and using the most effective means to excite him. At first, Dick looks shy and bewildered, but his gaze was wild and frightened. But then he gives it. His mouth opened in an innocent, foolish smile. He was so obedient and compliant that he allowed me to do whatever I wanted. Researchers note that this episode raises complex questions: the change in the concept of idiot from divine to animal, and how Fanny describes stupidity as an animal force which, once aroused, becomes irrepressible. Dick turns out to be not just a flower on a dunghill, but an embodiment of the sublime. The extreme horrors which his emotions clothed him in, his eyes shooting sparks of fire. The heroine's coming of age. Under Miss Cole's guidance, Fanny does not just have sex for money. She learns to manage her body as capital. As scholars note, her early encounters with money teach her its importance and the advantage of managing it independently. Financial success does not come by chance, as it sometimes does for Defoe's Moll Flanders. Fanny's security by the end of the novel is achieved through systematic methods. Miss Cole's main lesson is to save. It is precisely through this habit that Fanny manages to accumulate £800, a fortune that allows her to be independent of man. As she herself writes in the novel, I, having separated from Miss Cole, took a pleasant, convenient house in Marylebone. There, with a reserve of £800, the fruit of my respect for Miss Cole's advice, not counting some dresses, jewels, and silver, I saw myself provided for a long time, to wait without impatience for what the chapter of accidents might produce in my favor. Here Fanny appears not as a defenseless girl, but as a woman who knows how to plan. Here, under the appearance of a young lady whose husband had gone to sea, I laid out such lines of life and conduct which leaving me free to follow my desires, nevertheless strictly bound me by the rules of decorum and prudence, a course in which you cannot fail to notice the true pupil of Miss Cole. From the very beginning of the novel, Fanny emphasizes that her mind was not dull but the life of prostitute. In the first letter to Madame, she declares, I used the leisure afforded me by great ease and affluence to cultivate an understanding naturally not the most contemptible, and which even amidst the world of loose pleasures exerted more observation of the characters and manners of the world than what is common to those of my unhappy profession. This trait is her main advantage. She doesn't just experience adventures, she analyzes them, learns from her mistakes, and observes the hypocrisy of a society that condemns her but gladly uses her services. One of the most key episodes in Fanny's coming of age in her revenge on Mr. H when she catches him with a maid. Instead of crying or enduring, she decides to give him a taste of his own medicine. After Fanny sees Mr. H having sex with one of the maids, she decides to have sex with his manager, Will, with his assistant, and they begin an affair for some time. When Mr. H catches them, Fanny doesn't fall at his feet or beg for forgiveness. She threatens exposure. When Mr. H discovers the affair, he banishes Will and Fanny, agreeing to let Fanny keep all her gifts and some extra money when she reveals that she saw Mr. H having sex with the maid. Here, Fanny uses her vulnerability as a weapon for the first time. She understands that she has a level of pressure, knowledge of other people's secrets. Fanny no longer agrees. Fanny no longer agrees to just any client. She chooses those who can give her not only money but also protection or knowledge. For example, the old wealthy gentleman she meets after leaving Miss Cole becomes not just a lover but a mentor and a source of real wealth. On her way to her home village, Fanny meets an elderly wealthy man and she becomes his lover until his death soon after. After which Fanny inherits his fortune. There is no longer mere flesh trading. This is an investment in the future. As scholars note, coming of the age with each encounter with the new lover is the key line of the heroine's development. Compassion for herself and others. Fanny's coming of age is shown not only of cynicism, but also in her capacity for compassion. Despite living in a world where everyone buys and sells, she retains her humanity. She condemns those forms of sex she considers unnatural, but does not condemn her fellow professionals. She describes the stories of Emily, Louisa, Harriet with sympathy without passing moral judgment. Scholars note that for consenting characters, sexuality liberates, opposing modern fears of the body as weak and sinful. It is this liberation throughout acceptance of her own sexuality that is the main outcome of Fanny's coming of age. By the end of the Fanny has become a completely independent woman. She has money, a house, a reputation as a young lady whose husband has gone to sea, another one died, and most importantly, she understands that her body is a tool, not a prison. As critics write, Fanny's ability to create wealth is a means of empowerment and an outlet for her natural business talents. It is with this baggage, money, experience, observation, and inner freedom that she enters the final block of the novel. The resolution. After the death of the old gentleman who left her with the entire fortune, Fanny finds herself in the position she dreamt of at the start of her journey. She is rich and independent, but she doesn't simply enjoy the money. She reflects on her life, on how the past is behind her but still gives her no peace. I now possess the fortune which provided me with everything that my senses of thoughts could wish, did not, however, deprive me of the ability to enjoy it with moderation and discernment. But I could not help feeling that amidst all this affluence, something was missing, and that something was Charles. Fanny understands that money cannot replace love. She decides not to seek a new patron, but to remain faithful to the memory of Charles. I resolve to enter into no more connections that might defile the memory of my Charles, and to devote myself to seeking him if he still lived. or at least to learn his fate. Fanny decides to travel to her home village to visit her parents' graves and perhaps find traces of Charles. She described this journey as a return to her roots. I packed my things and set off for Lancashire, to those places where my childhood had passed. The road was long and I stopped at inns, attracting no attention. Along the way, she stops in a small town. As Fanny writes, at one of the inns where I stopped for the night, my carriage broke down and I had to stay there for several days. All this in that the most important meeting of her life takes place. Fanny described the moment of the meeting with incredible emotional power. She didn't know that Charles had returned from his voyage. She sees him in the inn's dining room and at first cannot believe her own her eyes. I was sitting in the parlor waiting for dinner when the door opened and a man entered. I looked at him and my heart stopped. It was Charles, my Charles, but what a sight he was! Emaciated, pale, in rags, his face burned by the sun and the sea winds. She describes his condition with pain. He was in the most pitiable state. His clothes hung in tatters, his face was thin and tainted like a sailor's, and in his eyes there was such deep sadness that I scarcely recognized him. This wasn't the brilliant Adonis I had loved, but a broken man returned from hell. Charles at first does not recognize her. He sees a wealthy lady in luxurious clothes and does not dare to speak. But Fanny approaches him and says, Charles, do you not recognize me? Has Fanny Hill changed so much that you cannot see in her the girl you once loved? Charles tells Fanny what happened to him after their separation. He was sent by his father to the South Seas, survived a shipwreck, was taken captive, worked as a slave, and finally returned to England, where he didn't dare to go to his father, thinking that he still hated him. My father sent me on a ship to the South Seas, ordering not to return until I had made a fortune. But we were wrecked off the coast of America. I was left penniless, taken captive, and kept in slavery for years. At last I managed to escape. I reached an English ship and returned here, but penniless, nameless, hopeless. He adds that his father has already died and he only learned of it upon his return. My father died while I was at sea and left his fortune to my sister because I had disobeyed him. I returned to England and began the desire to seek you, knowing that you had probably forgotten me. When Charles finishes his story, Fanny says without hesitation, Charles, I said, everything I have is now yours. I'm not poor. I kept myself for you as best I could. Take my fortune, it now belongs to you as much as it to me. But Charles replies with a dignity that strikes Fanny. No, Fanny, he said, I will not take your money as charity. I do not wish to be your kept man. If you agree, I will take you as my wife, and then I will accept your fortune as our common property, as a husband accepts his wife's dowry. But if you do not wish this, then I will live as I came, empty-handed, but with a clear conscience. Fanny, who in her life has seen many times ready to take everything from her and give nothing in return, understands that Charles is a man completely different. I wept, embraced him, and told him that he could take me and my money and everything I had only if he would never leave me again. And then comes marriage. Fanny describes her wedding with tenderness. We were married in the little country church where I had once been baptized. Charles put on a clean shirt and a deep-end coat which I bought for him. He would not take a penny from me before the wedding, but after it I gave him everything and he managed the fortune as an honest man should. They have a son whom they name William after Charles' father to make amends of old grievances. We named him William after my late father-in-law, whom Charles had to love despite all the cruelty he shown him. The final lesson. The novel ends with a didactic scene that gives the whole story its moral resolution. Fanny and Charles live in peace and harmony, but Fanny does not forget her past. At the very end, she describes how Charles takes the growing son past the London brothels, those places where Fanny once sold herself. One day, as we were passing by the quarter where Miss Brown's house once stood, Charles stopped the carriage and said to our son, "Look, William, these houses are heavens of vice and perdition. In such places souls are sold by money and honors for a moment of pleasure. If you ever find yourself in such place, remember that behind every door lies not joy but sorrow." Fanny adds, I listened to these words and tears ran down my cheeks. I thought of the path I had walked to find myself here, in this carriage, beside a husband who loves me and a son who I can raise as an honest man. And I understood that even the most fallen can rise if they have faith and love. And the final lines of the novel ring out at the summer of her entire life. There are the only genuine sweets I have found on the bosom of Wiltshire. Peace, freedom, and a quiet conscience, which have become my reward for having passed through all the depths of sin and risen from there as pure as if possible for a woman who has known as much as I have. Hidden meanings and philosophy. Pornography as a Bildungsroman. At first glance, Fanny Hill is simply an erotic novel, but literary scholars insist that it's also a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age novel. David McCracken identifies three stages in the heroine's sexual development: innocence, experimentation, and experience. Fanny begins as a tabula rasa, a blank state on which the world of vice writes its lessons. She learns not only the art of love, but also the art of survival. As Patricia Spex writes, the rural environment initially deprived Fanny, in her opinion, of experience of real life, and she welcomes the efforts of prostitutes to educate her. Fanny's key phrase, "all my foundation in virtue," was no other than a total ignorance of vice. The entire novel is the story of how ignorance turns into knowledge and knowledge into wisdom. The philosophy of the novel is deeply rooted in economics. The body as capital. Fanny learns to use her body not just as a source of pleasure, but as capital that yields profit. This is not just prostitution. This is early capitalism in action. Fanny accumulates £800 not by chance. It is the result of systematic approach to managing her business. Miss Cole becomes her mentor not only in sex, but also in finance. Scholars note Fanny's ability to create wealth in a means of empowerment and an outlet for her natural business talents. The body in the novel is a commodity, but Fanny never becomes just a commodity. She remains a subject who manages her body and profits from it. This is a radical statement for the 18th century. A woman can own herself and her body as a private property. And sex as a liberation. not seen. Unlike the Puritan morality of his time, Cleland shows sex not as a sin, but as a natural and pleasurable activity. Scholars write that for consenting characters, sexuality liberates opposite modern fears of the body as weak and sinful. Fanny feels no guilt over the sexual adventures. She describes them with delight and pleasure even looking back. The only thing she condemns are violence and unnatural forms of sex. And society as a hypocritical theater. Fanny constantly observes the hypocrisy of high society. Wealthy clients who preach virtue in public secretly indulge in all kinds of vices. Percival's father pays for his son to complete his education in a brothel. Mr. Barville, a respectable gentleman, pays to be flogged. Fanny becomes a mirror reflecting the voices of society. Her observations show that the boundary between respectable and fallen women is conditional. Both sides play the same game. Only some do it openly and others in secret. If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to hit a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye, everyone.